Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our special webinar today, Future of Sourcing 2021 and Beyond. Supply chains around the world, it's growing more complex. In the wake of COVID-19, companies are assessing the continued viability of globally distributed production. Geopolitical matters may also impact the production map, and e-commerce has further altered how people buy things and what they buy. In this section, we will have a very deep discussion with representatives of all organizations, whom they will share from their different perspectives of how the future of sourcing will look like in 2021 and beyond. Our speakers will also share key lessons learned and best practices with our buyer community. Now, we are so privileged today to have four very special panelists who own a wealth of knowledge in supply chain and sourcing. So let me introduce all of them. Ms. Emily Choi of Invest Hong Kong. Emily is the Senior Manager of Consumer Products at Invest Hong Kong, the government department responsible for attracting and facilitating foreign direct investment into Hong Kong. She works with overseas and mainland consumer products companies in setting up and expanding their businesses in Hong Kong. Our second panelist, Mr. Anson Bailey from KPMG. Anson joined KPMG in Hong Kong in 1999 and is currently a partner based in the Hong Kong office, heading up the consumer and retail practice in the Asia Pacific region. Anson is also part of the KPMG Global Consumer and Retail Steering Group, as well as a member of the Global Technology Innovation Center and a cluster leader of the technology, media, and telecoms practice based in Hong Kong. Mr. Andrew McIntosh of the Australian Chamber of Commerce Hong Kong. Andrew is the chairman of the Australian Chamber of Commerce Hong Kong. He is also the COO of the March Fund, a global food technology sustainability fund, and also the non-executive chairman of Acorus Asset Management, a China-Africa private equity firm. Mr. Matthew McKenzie from DKSH Consumer Goods. Matthew is Director Business Development North Asia for DKSH Consumer Goods. DKSH is a leading provider of market expansion services across Asia Pacific with focus on fast-moving consumer goods, food services, luxury goods, as well as fashion and lifestyle products. Thank you for being with us, panelists. Now, KPMG and Invest Hong Kong has just published a new report last month on this very subject, Future of Sourcing 2021 and Beyond. And I have here the report. It's a 70-page report with full of information with many key trends and findings identified. Now, before we jump onto our panel discussion, I would like to invite Anson from KPMG to give us a snapshot of the key findings of this report. Anson, please.
Thanks, Wendy, and a very good afternoon to you all. Thank you to Global Sources for arranging this session with all of us on the future of sourcing. And obviously a big thank you to my colleagues or distinguished panel members, Emily, Andrew, and Matthew. And what I'd like to do now is I'm just going to share my screen with everybody so that hopefully you can see that. And Wendy, how does, okay, I was going to say, Emily, does that seem okay to you? Good, thumbs up.
Good.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, what I really want to do is just over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to make sure I time myself here as well, so I don't go over time. But over the next 15 minutes, I just really wanted to share with you all about this future of sourcing 2021 and beyond. And a big thank you to Emily and the Invest Hong Kong team, because they were working side by side with our KPMG team as well in pulling together this report. And Emily, I think you and I went off and we interviewed a large number of those senior executives, because we really wanted to kind of hear from them, what's going on at the coal face. Because to be frank, there's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of headlines, and some of them are rather misleading, I think, in some of the media, talking about the demise of China and the demise of Hong Kong as well. So why don't we just share some of the views? We'll let you decide what you feel, and then we will come back and talk about it across our distinguished panel. So if I move quickly along, key messages, I think, for all of us for this report. Yes, there's been a significant impact of COVID-19. It's impacted the entire supply chains around the world. And I think companies now have suddenly realized that perhaps they do need to have those business continuity plans in place. They also need to look at how they digitize across those supply chains. Another big question that gets thrown out all the time is, where's the next Hong Kong? Well, quite simply stated, there's never going to be another Hong Kong emerge, I think, with this new era of digitization that's here. Equally, of course, organizations need to leverage those new technologies as well. And certainly something that we heard from everybody, from all of those senior executives, is that talent development and upskilling our people is going to be critical in the weeks and months ahead. Equally, some of the key messages that we heard were that Hong Kong is kind of transforming into this new global digital supply chain services hub. There's still a high concentration of sourcing talent here. Hong Kong is still set to be a regional hub for the rest of China, and it's got long established ties around the rest of the world. So it's still an ideal place to manage those supply chains. And of course, we look at the strengths in the financial and legal and commercial structures. Equally, we look at the links with the Greater Bay Area. We look at the links with the ASEAN region as well. And I think one thing's for sure, and that is that here in Hong Kong, a lot of those business executives told us they like the fact that people here do have a very international business mindset. And then equally, we also see this clustering effect, and I'll come back and talk about this with regards if you combine Hong Kong together with other cities like Shenzhen and Guangzhou across the Greater Bay Area. And obviously, new technologies, they're allowing us to be a lot more flexible and, of course, operate seamlessly around the world. Equally, Hong Kong is still acting as this super connector to the Greater Bay Area. The infrastructure is second to none. And I think that's really important, because if we look at the movement of people and goods, that is really important for the future. Equally, free trade agreements, we've seen a number of them between Hong Kong and the rest of Southeast Asia. And of course, the interesting thing, of course, is if we look at the region, places like Vietnam have actually signed the most free trade agreements across the entire region. And we'll come back to Vietnam in a second. RCEP, I'm sure we've all heard a little bit about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, known as RCEP, signed on the 15th of November. And what does that mean? Well, it means 15 Asia-Pacific countries coming together, the bloc, the ASEAN bloc of 10 countries, together with China, together with Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, this is going to be a slow burn, quite frankly. It's not going to happen overnight. But what really is exciting, of course, is the fact that we are now seeing the creation of this massive free trade zone. A third of the world's population right now, 29% of the global GDP. But wait for this. that's going to rise to nearly 50% by 2030. So again, we really expect an explosion, if you like, in terms of the trade. And equally, we do see that those supply chains are going to benefit by that harmonization, because across the region today, there are still quite a lot of complexities across that Asia Pacific region. We also expect to see the elimination of a range of tariffs. But that's going to take a number of years. That, again, is not going to happen overnight. But things like e-commerce, we think that is going to be a very significant player in the future. And of course, movement of people as well. And again, I think Hong Kong can be this gateway to ASEAN for both the multinationals and increasingly for those Chinese corporations as well. From our research, we still see that Hong Kong is at the heart of end-to-end supply chains. If you look at the World Trade Statistical Review for 2020, actually Hong Kong moved up that ranking from position 12 to position number 8. We are, quite frankly, we are seeing a shift from China. But again, what I would say to everybody here is that, for the longest time, since I have been across and based here in Asia Pacific for the last 29 years, China was the key player. It still is. If you look at a number of the categories, it still very much is the key player. But companies now are diversifying, without a doubt. But let's be very frank here. Companies were diversifying before all of the US-China trade tensions, before President Trump making all of his various commentary. The reality is that a lot of those companies were already moving and diversifying across that ASEAN region. A big question that I keep getting asked is Vietnam the next China? Well, not quite. It is absolutely a growing base for multinationals. But again, if you look at population, if you look at GDP, the reality is that Vietnam is still, look at the size of a province in China like Guangdong. So, again, there are infrastructure issues, there are infrastructure challenges, but certainly it is a good base. And it's also got that very close proximity and a land border with mainland China. We do see a change in global market shares in terms of export. You can see there that Vietnam is a significant benefactor, across a number of those different categories. I would also say, of course, Asia is starting to scale up. I always use the analogy that, China is like this 300-pound gorilla on the manufacturing, on the export stage. However, well, maybe now it's perhaps more like a 250-pound gorilla, not quite as big, but still very significant. And we do see other markets now developing. And, again, if you look at the map, Hong Kong is right in the middle, geographically right in the center of all of those different activities. Crystal ball gazing, if we look at places like Vietnam and Bangladesh, they show the highest growth in production. Interestingly, if you look at those projections, both from the EU imports as well as the USA imports, you can see there that Bangladesh is very significant regarding those EU imports, and of course Vietnam very significant with those US imports. But there are still a number of headwinds. Recently the US also announced that they were looking into a number of trade practices in Vietnam as well. So it's interesting to note that there are a number of these headwinds. If we look at the emerging sourcing markets in Asia, as I said, Vietnam certainly out in front, but there's a lot of other markets as well. India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, there's a number of corporates that are really now using Bangladesh as a key production hub. And of course we have Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia And behind them, we've also got some of those other markets like Myanmar, which are now starting to come online. With regards to our future of sourcing paper, we spoke to a lot of senior executives, people like Christophe Roussel, the global executive vice president, global sourcing at Gap, Anne-Laure Decours, Chief Sourcing Officer at Puma, Gareth Brooks, Managing Director of VF Asia. The list goes on. The interesting thing is that they are all based here in Hong Kong. Now, a number of them are also, of course, working globally. And there are a few other business leaders that are out around the region, but also back in Europe and North America. But it seems to be a lot easier to take care of your supply chains when you are close to the factories. People like Anne-Laure at Puma said, Hong Kong is still the best option with the flexibility and adaptability of Hong Kong people being the key to the city's efficiency with entrepreneurial talent. Equally, Gareth Brooks at VF was talking about how Hong Kong's status as an important financial hub reassures companies like VF. Equally, we spoke to a number of those adjacency businesses like DHL, DHL Global Forwarding. Mark Slade was talking about the fact that, of course, Hong Kong remains a global air gateway, and it's going to continue to be the leader for the foreseeable future. We also see the emergence of a number of the startup companies as well. So what's driving change? Of course, production, logistics costs, those trade agreements, automation, sustainability, quality at scale. I also just want to mention something around the emergence of Hong Kong's diverse ecosystem, certainly in the startup space. One thing that we did see is, of course, the growth of, technology and innovation. And we're definitely seeing, governments, including the government here in Hong Kong, who have been providing a heck of a lot of funding to develop innovation and technology. And that doesn't happen overnight. It also takes, a number of years to really build up. And that's what's interesting about this clustering effect. If you look at the global top 10 science, innovation, and technology cluster rankings, Hong Kong, along with Shenzhen and Guangzhou, ranks number 2 in the recent Global Innovation Index for 2020. And there are a lot of other reports there that we were looking at. Now, again, here in Hong Kong, you do have the likes of Cyberport, you have the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. They are nurturing and developing a lot of these startups. You have the brand new Advanced Manufacturing Center that's going to come online later in 2021. And I also want to mention that it's not just those science parks. We're seeing a repurposing of some of these old businesses, like, for example, the Mills Fabrica, which is an old textile mill over in Chin Wan in the New Territories. And they're repurposing themselves. They're driving innovation. They've got a very cool customer retail experience area. They're housing some very cool entrepreneurs and startup businesses that are very much focused on material innovation. They're focused on consumers, the use of technology. So there's some really cool things that are happening. I also just want to mention ESG. This is interesting because we also see Hong Kong also becoming this center for ESG reporting in the future. And of course, investors, regulators, the consumers, your employees, the banks, they're all really focused and looking at what you're doing. And we've seen the regulators now that are driving those ESG initiatives. Now, just before I stop, I also just want to mention sometimes there's a disconnect between everything we see in the manufacturing and sourcing side to the end consumers. And I think we need to be smarter how we look at those consumers with this new reality. We did a series of papers at KPMG, 75,000 global consumers. And the key trends were, of course, the rise of digital. That's here. We saw ESG, sustainability becoming really key drivers. Home as the new hub. Also the erosion of trust we all need to make sure we do a better job. Shopping festivals are gaining momentum. I'm sure you heard about Singles Day, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, but just going to Singles Day, quite amazing, $74.1 billion. That's nearly double from last year. 250,000 brands participated. And I spoke to the L'Oreal COO just before last week, and he mentioned to me that now in China, over 50% of their business has moved online. So it's quite amazing when we look at those consumers, because there is definitely the changing consumer behavior. So really, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I wanted to mention. I wanted to mention those changing consumer behaviors we need to think about. The rise of purpose-led businesses, a real greater focus on ESG sustainability, emerging technologies, AI, blockchain, 3D, virtual sampling tech, they are all here and they're now being commercialized. And of course, we've also got to look at the talent development. We've got to reskill and upskill our people with the relevant skill sets. And obviously, with this shifting focus to the Chinese ASEAN markets, we're seeing far more digitally minded consumers, tech savvy consumers right now. So lots of exciting things, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to pause there because obviously I could keep talking forever. But I hope I've given you a sense of, what we're seeing across the entire end-to-end supply chain, because it really is very exciting. But we've got to collaborate. We've all got to work together. And as I said, we're seeing the emergence of some of these very cool startups that are doing some very cool things in that space. So, Wendy, back to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I really look forward to a very interesting discussion panel as well. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Anson. Actually, there's so much information to absorb. Well, obviously, I have a lot of questions to ask, but for our audience, if you have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists, you can also type in the Q&A chat section, and we'll try to answer some of those during this section. So when we talk about sourcing and supply chain, the chain always starts with consumer demand, and consumer demand is obviously tightly connected with economy. So of course, the positive news is that many countries have already approved the contingency use of COVID-19 vaccines, and hopefully the pandemic will be over soon. So Andrew, what's your view on the business and consumer demand outlook after the pandemic and the economy forecast for 2021?
Thanks, Wendy, and really appreciate the question, and a big welcome to everybody today and my fellow panelists. The outlook is, in a nutshell, very good, right? We're all expecting and anticipating, a healthy rebound, and historically economies rebound very, very strongly after these sorts of pandemics, right? The most recent global pandemic would have been Spanish flu in 1918 and 1919 that ushered in the roaring 20s, almost a whole decade of overly exuberant growth. So, and it's a mix. It's a combination of too much investment capital, i.e. dry powder as it's called, combined with returning consumer demand, and also combined with sort of pent-up frustration, right? And everyone's sort of happy to be able to be out and travel and so on. So we expect all of these things to happen as well this time. The interesting thing, though, will be how does that manifest itself? And if we sort of dig down a sort of one layer deeper, then what we can see is also quite interesting, that the response to the rebound will vary quite significantly by both country, as Anson has touched on as well, and also by sector. Some areas of the supply chain are holding up remarkably well and doing quite well. It's, generally speaking, been a very good time to be in, retail shelf-stable foods, for example. Not a great time to be an airline. So, looking at the way that these sectors will rebound is going to be key. And then looking at, as Anson has talked about, sort of the regional picture. The good news is that I suspect that there's almost no other place where I'd rather be to benefit from that rebound than Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong is going to be very well positioned, both with things like the RCEP, the Greater Bay Area, with things like being on the doorstep of the mainland, which is leading the recovery already. Hong Kong is going to be uniquely positioned to take advantage of all of that. The bad news, and there's only one sort of bad news here, it won't start as soon as we'd like. It's still going to take longer to go through. We've never had a global pandemic that's lasted less than 2 years. They're typically 2 to 4 years. We're all hoping that this time we're closer to the end than the beginning of this pandemic, but I suspect that there's still quite a way to go until the recovery really sets in and makes a substantial economic impact.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So we're hopeful that we'll be seeing a positive, very positive economic rebound. Emily, anything to add from a broader governmental point of view?
Let us take a look at the current consumer market in Hong Kong, just to let you all know about how COVID is affecting consumer behavior. In fact, a lot of media have been saying that Hong Kong retail is very much affected. Yes, Hong Kong retail is affected, but it's not as a gloomy picture that the media has been mentioning. In Hong Kong, when we look at the consumption category, in consumption expenditure in the supermarket category this year, actually we are seeing an increase in the supermarket category by 11% against that of last year. So what I see is that for mass market category, retail is still doing great. And of course, the focus is shifting to products that are related to home living, personal care, sanitation products. And so we have also seen some startups doing their business on like doing trade for PPEs and have earned massive profits since their inception. And so I think going forward, Hong Kong is poised to benefit from the control of COVID. Hong Kong government is very committed to controlling the COVID situation. And also, Hong Kong is part of the Greater Bay Area, which comprises of 9 mainland cities plus Hong Kong plus Macau, with a population of that of UK and with a GDP of that of Australia. So this is a very affluent group of consumers. And of course, the travel now is very much restricted. People have to undergo quarantine, but I believe that mainland China and Hong Kong, we are going to reopen the borders as soon as the COVID situations are being on control. And that will mean a lot of consumption power will be unleashed, which will benefit Hong Kong a lot. So that is the Hong Kong local consumption market. Globally, in terms of trade, Hong Kong, we are also seeing a moderate uptake in terms of exports in quarter 3. That is about 3 to 4% year on quarter to quarter, if we consider the seasonally adjust, and again 3 to 4% year on year for quarter 3 against that of last year. So that will of course, it's a good sign because we are finally seeing an uptick, and how this will go will really depend on the COVID situation globally. But as we are hearing that the vaccine programs are being rolled out in different countries, hopefully this will be a good news for everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emily. And of course, the good news is that Hong Kong will also begin distributing vaccines next month in January. Yeah. So, of course, because of the pandemic situation, year 2020 is definitely a very challenging year. And we could only imagine the magnitude of impact on supply chain that brought by the pandemic situation. So DKSH currently serves so many fast-moving consumer product brands and also manages 60 distribution centers in Asia. So Matthew, I'm very interested to know, how do you mitigate those disruptions and still manage to optimize the supply chain efficiency under COVID-19 influence? And are there any of those measures that you will still deploy after the pandemic, which becomes kind of the new normal for your supply chain management?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. It certainly has been a challenging year in terms of managing such a complex supply chain across so many markets. And, you know, what we've seen is massive dislocation at times of the year where there's been a big upswing, unforecasted big upswing in terms of demand from consumers, particularly when there's been panic buying across a number of markets. That's then led to, and then to compound that, there's been a lot of challenge in our supply chain in terms of working with factories all around the world. And a lot of factories have had to shut down at different times because of COVID infestation and or dislocation of supply chain in their local markets. I guess the focus that we've put on our business, and you know, we are, as the largest market expansion services group across the region, is really to hone in on our sales and operations planning and to digitize as much of our information systems as possible. So, you know, we've really got a clear understanding of what's in our supply chain network, what's on the water, what's on order, and we've also back-ended that into a number of retail and distribution partners that we use across the region in terms of understanding, you know, what products are moving and how quickly, in order for us to be as nimble as possible to refill the supply chain as and when it's required. The other area that I guess this has really encouraged us to focus on is the hub and spoke type system, and this is where I think building on some of the themes that Anson was talking about earlier, this is where we're extremely bullish in Hong Kong and also the Greater Bay Area in terms of, you know, being such a strong logistical hub. We're not just talking the Port of Hong Kong. We've got the Port of Sheko, for example, which we're using a lot up in Shenzhen. Yantian Port as well, which we use quite regularly. And in fact, we've now got a significant logistical capability on both sides of the border, which give us then flexibility to, you know, bring in larger stock holding of product, and then we can disperse it from here quite simply to Taiwan, to Vietnam, to anywhere in Southeast Asia within our network. So I think that the digitization piece has really been pulled forward, and that communication of information. I mean, digitization is one thing, but getting actually actionable data points from both ends of the supply chain and really translating that into best practices has really been the focus for us in 2020.
Okay, so you mentioned about hub and spoke strategy. So how do you build, you know, how do you choose your hub and how do you choose your spokes?
Well, I guess it's probably business and somewhat sector dependent, but really what we're looking at is when we've got product which has longer shelf life, for example, we'll negotiate longer trading terms with our suppliers now, and we'll bring product into a hub such as Hong Kong, which, and the reason we bring it here is because, you know, from a shipping perspective, we can go, you know, we've got so many regular sailings, or if it's air freight, we've got regular air freight shipments around all of the key ports in the region. So in terms of looking for a hub, it's a well-resourced location that has regular and I wouldn't just say regular, but consistent shipment to all key ports around the region, and Hong Kong really fits the bill for that in this part of the region.
Yeah. All right. So I have been hearing a lot about, you know, Asia. So for sure, the world's economy, the economic center of gravity now is very focused on Asia. So there are a few important economic initiatives and alliances launched or formed in recent years, including Greater Bay Area Initiative and RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which just, you know, signed and confirmed just 1 month ago. So I would like to ask our panelists, so how are these going to impact market demand, movement of goods, and supply chain? So Matthew, what's your viewpoint?
Well, I think in terms of the Greater Bay Area initiatives and the policy which have come out of Beijing, you know, we really see almost borderless type supply chain between us and I guess the Pearl River Delta, so primarily Guangdong and into Macau. I guess it's also for a company of our size and scale, it's also very encouraging to see that we're expecting a simplification in terms of moving human capital between both sides of the border in order to be able to fill key roles, whether they be in Guangdong or here in Hong Kong. Up until now, it's very much been two separate countries, two separate economies. But we see simplification in multiple ways. And I guess what this does is it really brings in savings for our business, so we can really focus on again, to Anson's point, focus on that consumer. And you know, they're really the top of the tree for us in terms of driving demand through our business. So it allows us to more simply focus on the consumer and not worry so much about the border and the differing systems and taxation structures for individuals, et cetera, across both sides.
Right. So Anson, what about you? What's your viewpoint on that, especially on RCEP? Anson, you have to unmute. We can't hear you.
That's the word and the phrase of the year. Unmute yourself, right? We can't hear you. Please. Anyway, Wendy, good point. You know, I think it is an exciting time. I think I mentioned that with the likes of RCEP, it's something that's going to take us the next few years, bringing everyone together, harmonizing, all of those, various rules and regulations. I was talking to some of my colleagues in Thailand, and they were also telling me there's so many different rules and regulations. I think about 19 or 20 different processes, and that's where it gets really interesting, I think, for all of us as we start to harmonize across the region, because we've of course heard a lot about the European Union being, the biggest free trade zone in the world. Just imagine the power of the region here. Imagine bringing those 10 ASEAN bloc countries with the likes of China and Japan and South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. And it's really interesting because actually this is the first time that that this kind of free trade agreement's been signed between China and Japan, and equally between Japan and South Korea as well. So, I think there are some really interesting initiatives, but no one said it was going to be easy, Wendy. It's going to take us time.
Right.
I'm thinking that it's going to take us several years before we can really see the true benefits. But the fact is that it's happened at all is a victory for free trade, and I think that's the important thing, and it's happening right here. It's happening on our doorstep. We certainly see of course Hong Kong being able to play a role, and again I think there are some big opportunities, but again it's still, it's not going to happen at the click of your fingers. It's going to take us a while to get there. But, at least, it's been signed. It's been talked about for a long time. The fact that it did get signed off on November the 15th, as you said, 1 month ago, I am, I'm really quite bullish. And I think President Xi Jinping has also come out, to say that they really are going to work hard towards, harmonizing, a number of these areas. And again, quite frankly, if China says it's going to do something, generally it does it. I think we can learn a lot. But as I said, it's going to take us time, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, for sure. So Emily, so geographically, Hong Kong is very centrally located in Asia. So what do you think would be Hong Kong's renewed or enhanced role in terms of sourcing under the backdrop of all these economic initiatives?
Yeah, sure. Actually, we are seeing huge growth in the Asian market. We took a look at the Euromonitor statistics. We saw that they are forecasting the Asian e-commerce market to grow on an average rate of 12%, and that the Asian e-commerce market 4 years down the road, that is in 2024, is going to be double of that of last year. So that is a tremendously huge opportunity for everyone. And even though we are undergoing the COVID situation, the International Monetary Fund is still forecasting strong growth in mainland China and also developing economies in Asia. Actually, I think actually for the International Monetary Fund is expecting that the GDP growth for next year for both mainland and also developing countries in Asia are both 8%. So when we add all these up, it's gonna be a huge opportunity, especially with RCEP, which is an open, inclusive, and also rule-based collaboration agreement. And for that will generate a lot of opportunities in Hong Kong. And given the COVID situation, we are also seeing retailers transforming themselves into more e-commerce based, just-in-time form of delivery, which means the demand for air cargo and other logistics are gonna boost up a lot. We are seeing that Hong Kong is investing heavily in terms of air cargo. Right now, Hong Kong, last year, the Hong Kong airport is the world's busiest air cargo airport. And right now, we are also seeing companies like DHL investing heavily into their logistics hub in Hong Kong. They are currently using Hong Kong as a Central Asia hub, but they are going to invest in Hong Kong much more so that they can handle 6 times of their current volume. We are also seeing another air logistics center being built next to our Hong Kong airport. It's gonna be built in a couple of years' time, which is built under Cainiao, which is the Alibaba-owned logistics arm. So again, like Anson, I'm quite bullish on that. It is not immediate, but things are turning for the good.
Okay, thank you, Emily. And Andrew, so there are obviously a lot of opportunities arising from all these economic initiatives. So Australia is also part of the RCEP alliance. So what's your advice on how businesses could take advantage of, for example, like RCEP or other Asian economic initiatives?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Wendy. It's an interesting sort of sign of the times, right? It's a few years ago, if you only had to go back about 2 or 3 years, and it was sort of not a good time to be a British or an American company trying to sort of access the sort of Chinese market under one of the agreements. Now it seems like we're coming into an era where it will actually be okay, and being an Australian company is now a disadvantage. So of course, for a given company out there, it'd be nice to be able to change sort of the nationality of your company. That's not really difficult, not really possible, and it's going to be a difficult time for Australian companies. It's also going to be a difficult time for a lot of different companies in import-export, I think. But it comes back, I think the answer to this question is actually in your question. I think the best way to access these markets is making sure that you are aligned with one of these programs, be it RCEP or be it a GBA initiative or a free trade agreement where they're still standing. I think making sure that your business activities are aligned with a program that is governmentally sanctioned removes a lot of the headwinds that are there. And making sure, therefore, that the best way to access is make sure that you're well supported, you've got good advice. I think you know, a decade ago, you could sort of land in Hong Kong, set up a business and sort of go it alone. Organizations like the Chamber existed to help you, but there were plenty of examples of people that sort of just landed and started their own business and did very, very well. I think those days are becoming tougher and tougher. I guess I should say, you know, there's a plug for advisory companies, not just the Chamber, but advisors like, you know, Anson at KPMG, right? The value that advisors, like KPMG, like Chambers of Commerce are offering business these days, I think is more critical than ever. Because of their ability to help businesses navigate and make sure your business is positioned under one of these frameworks. And I think that's really going to be more important going forward over the coming years.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's very practical advice.
So
now, talking about Asia, so e-commerce and social commerce are becoming more mainstream than ever. So for instance, according to a recent report from GfK, 64% of people in Indonesia, they use their mobile devices for their online sourcing, online shopping trips. So I would like to ask Matthew and Anson, Matthew first. So how is this impacting supply chain, and any best practices to share on how businesses can build a more agile supply chain and sourcing strategy?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Wendy. Look, I think what we've seen with the rise of e-commerce, and particularly the rise of mobile phones across all markets in the region, has really led to, you know, something that I call a democratization of consumption. So essentially everybody now has access to consume. And even if they don't have access necessarily to consume all categories, at least they have access to consume information about all categories, and then become even more aspirational than they were before. So what that has led to, obviously, is a higher demand of the younger generations and a higher expectation in terms of quick turnaround. And I guess a lot of the younger consumers that we're seeing across the region don't really understand all of the work that goes into the supply chain behind supplying. All they see is a screen. They click buy. They know that their account is now X number of dollars, or, you know, won or rupee, or less than what it previously was. And they're expecting the goods to arrive in perfect condition in a very short period of time. So high expectation and a very complex system. So I guess this is where, again, what we're really seeing is letting the information that we have within our systems become unleashed. So I think it's really about having strong IT systems and strong digitization across your business. And I think it's about having very lean, nimble supply chain that can act and respond very quickly to demand. And where possible and where appropriate, you can actually redeploy stock to cover shortfalls that you have in your system in market A, and you cover it from market B, etc. So that's what we're seeing is really, I guess, a crisscross of supply chain behind the scenes to, I guess, to maintain those high standards, which are now becoming more and more commonplace because of the change of technology at the consumer end.
Right.
Yeah,
And so,
Wendy,
yeah.
just to add on to Matthew's points as well. Yeah, I mean, I think we have to understand now that with COVID-19, it's accelerated everything digitally. And so those consumers are simply not going to go back to the old way of doing things, right? And what is interesting is, of course, you know, we've been working on several different reports. We just finished a report with Google recently, looking at AI for everyone, and the impact of you know, that kind of technology is having not just on corporates and businesses, but on the consumers. And equally, another shout out to Google, because in the last couple of weeks they just did their economy Southeast Asia paper 2020, and what was interesting, of course, they were talking about this acceleration, and they were saying that in 2020 they have, you know, we've seen 40 million new consumers go online across Southeast Asia. So those numbers are increasing day by day. And if we look at the 300-pound gorilla, China, if we look at what's happening in China, of course. You've got 300 million millennials. And then let's talk about the Generation Z, the Gen Zs. I have a teenage son. You know, these kids are digital natives. They do everything digitally. And there's 170 million of them across China. And think about the millions of them across ASEAN as well, Wendy. So what I would say is that we are seeing this next generation of consumers, and COVID-19 is simply accelerated everything across social commerce, e-commerce. And it was interesting because even on the social commerce side of things, you look at those ASEAN markets, they are very, very significant markets regarding social commerce as well. So there's, again, the writing is on the wall, Wendy.
Yeah, so we do have a question from the audience that are very much relating to this topic. What will be the role of digital sourcing transformation in 3 years' time?
Well, again, sorry for me to kind of butt in or give you my views. I think that transformation is happening right now. If you don't do anything, you are toast, right? You're finished. The reality is that a lot of these businesses, and we're working with a lot of traditional businesses as well, they recognize that they now have to digitize and they have to do things very, very differently. And, for sourcing as well, Hong Kong, I would say it's quite a traditional business or quite quite a traditional industry, but there are now companies that are really now driving a lot of these cool 3D technologies. We've seen the 3D virtual tech. Emily, you and I went off. We interviewed the likes of TG3D, Chain of Demand. We interviewed a lot of these different players. Unspun, another really interesting startup where they're developing all of this 3D technology. And originally they were doing it focused on the consumers, the B2C, but of course they then realized that they got this cool technology, they can apply it to B2B as well. So they're now pivoting, and they've gone in and they've just signed a major contract with H&M and a number of these other players. So I think a key message there is that we are going to see I think one of the positives, we're going to see a lot more collaboration between those traditional players as well as some of those startup players to drive all of these new ideas, to drive all of these new POCs, proof of concepts.
Right. And obviously, Hong Kong's role is also evolving. So in the report, the Future of Sourcing 2021 and Beyond report, there's a section about Hong Kong is transforming into the next steps as a global digital supply chain services hub. So what does that mean? And any cases or examples to share?
Well, again, I don't want to, because we've got lots of other great panelists here. So I'd rather kind of get thoughts from the other panel members. But, again, I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, if you look at Hong Kong's history, it's a trading hub, it's a finance hub, it's a commercial hub. If we can join the dots, right? If we can really join the dots, then I absolutely believe we are going to be this global digital supply chain services hub as well. And I think I mentioned things like ESG, green finance, sustainability. These are all things that I think Hong Kong will absolutely be able to, to be the center in the future, Wendy. I'm going to pause there because obviously there's lots of other great panel members.
Anything to add? Yeah, Matthew.
I think that necessity is one of the greatest drivers of innovation. And really what COVID has done is it's necessitated the innovation and digitization of business. And I think that the pace of change, if anything, is continuing to accelerate. It's not going to slow down. And I think, once consumers and once business actually get a taste of it, this is the future. So we've got the opportunity to embrace it or potentially die on the vine. I guess from a DKSH perspective, it's interesting. I mean, we're a large Swiss listed group. We've been in the region for 150 years. We've got 33,500 employees, 20 billion euro plus in revenues. And we've got a CTO, so a chief technology officer that works across all of our systems. We've also got a chief digital officer, and his role, he reports directly to our global CEO. His role is all about the digitizations of our systems, processes, and essentially bringing us into the 21st century. And I'm very proud to say that he is based here in Hong Kong. You know, and Hong Kong is again, to Anson's point, you know, Hong Kong is a very traditional trading hub. But I think with the innovative nature of the people here, I think that the environment in which we're in, and the geographic benefits that we've got of where we are in the systems and processes, here is the place to digitize more than anywhere. So, you know, I think it makes me really bullish on the future of Hong Kong and its role in the supply chain for the 21st century.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So talking about skill set, so, you know, intra-Asian trade, digital transformation, you know, pandemic, and many more factors and circumstances are impacting supply chain. So now for businesses and for sourcing professionals, so what skill set would be vital for them to tackle this ever-changing phase of sourcing? Matthew, would you like to answer that question first?
Sure. Look, I think obviously you need to be on top of your game in terms of the competitive landscape. I think to some of the points that Andrew raised earlier in terms of you really don't want to be swimming against the tide, you want to be swimming with the tide in terms of where government will be supporting. And again, if we look at the Greater Bay Area policy, and it's stated in the 5-year plan, and I think the next 5-year plan for China, for the Chinese government, in terms of Hong Kong's role, we will be a logistics hub, and they are investing in that. And when China says something's going to happen, it happens. So I think really understanding that network of agreements, and I guess trying to find a way to swim with the tide, and I guess trying to then leverage technology to be as quickly dive into that opportunity as you can. I feel that if you think about the traditional trading business that DKSH has been for so many years, and you know what our business is transforming into, I think is almost a microcosm of that. You know, typically in supply chain, you'd go as broad as possible in terms of product. You'll go as broad as possible in terms of geography. I think now it's really about trying to almost like really honing in on the opportunity in terms of a product or a niche, and then going as broad as you can. But I think through through e-commerce and through other channels that are now available, I think that there are some really interesting opportunities out there that will continue to be available.
Yeah. Andrew, any more advice to add on?
I just want to echo Matthew's comments there. I mean, I think the sort of skills that will be highly prized over the coming years will be, and if I sort of compare them to sort of a typical supply chain executive, whatever that might be, would be, I think companies are looking for an emphasis on certainly an understanding of digitization. I think that's going to be key and core. The second skill is an awareness, a deep awareness of the consumer segments. And I think in addition to that, not just sort of the traditional marketing segments of saying, oh, you know, this product is, or our website's targeting females 34 to 49 or something, but more understanding the cultural drivers. We're seeing a bit of the conflict right now is a conflict between globalization and nationalization. And how do you navigate that? You know, it's 3 years ago, Chinese consumers couldn't get enough of Australian dairy and New Zealand dairy. Now all of a sudden it matters whether it's Australian dairy or whether it's New Zealand dairy. because of the political stance and the perceived political standing of where those companies are in their countries are in their relationships. So there's a geopolitical or a cultural overlay that's coming into our consumer segments. And I think the companies that understand those dimensions will perform better than those companies that don't.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. So I'm just conscious about the time. So let's talk practical. So I think for a lot of businesses or sourcing professionals, they have to, start somewhere. And I've heard a lot of ideas today: globalization, digitalization, ESG, AI, blockchain, etc., etc. So for our panelists today, what's the one most important advice you will give to our buyer community on the very next step to get their business prepared for 2021 and beyond, in terms of preparing and also to manage their supply chain, which is ever evolving? So may I start with Emily?
Maybe I'll have two suggestions. My suggestions are that to embrace digitization and be agile, because things are changing quickly, much faster than before COVID-19, and I am seeing that changes are gonna stay. So be agile, embrace digitization. Yeah, that's my advice.
Thank you, Emily. Andrew, your words of wisdom.
Well, can't go past Emily's words there. Digitization, agility, and again, I'd probably only add one more, which would be cultural sensitivity, let's call it.
Matthew?
Yeah, I think really that change is the only constant that we can be assured of from now moving into the future. And so what I would encourage people is to have that ongoing and continuous sense of curiosity. And I think that curiosity is something that's been part of traditional supply chain for many years. As as individuals and as businesses, we discover new markets and new ways to do business. And I think if anything, the speed of change will continue to increase. So maintain that sense of curiosity and embrace the change.
Yep. Thank you, Matthew. And last but not least, Anson.
Wendy, I mean, I think everybody, everyone captured all the buzzwords, but I absolutely agree. I mean, I think if we absolutely all need to embrace change, we have to embrace innovation now before it is too late. And as I mentioned, we've really got to do a better job of understanding our consumers, and maybe the data can help us to do that. And then a final point is, we can't go it alone. We absolutely today need to collaborate with each other across the industry, whether you're a big player or a small startup. We have to collaborate, Wendy. That's so important.
Yeah. So I've got a lot of great ideas: digitalization, agile strategy, cultural sensitivity, and collaboration. So that was a great discussion. And obviously this subject is too important and too big that we could carry on for hours. So to our audience, if you're interested to get a copy of this report, Future of Sourcing 2021 and Beyond, so you may just send us an email and we will take care of it. So the email address is vip@globalsources.com. And then if you are not already familiar with Global Sources offers an array of sourcing related products and services, including online sourcing trade shows, online sourcing marketplace, regular webinars on sourcing, magazines, etc. Please check out for details on our website, www.globalsources.com. And if you would like us to recommend any Asian suppliers to you, please also simply send an email to us at vip@globalsources.com and let us know how we may help you. Now, as our webinar is coming to an end, A big applause and big gratitude to our 4 panelists who joined us today to share their knowledge and insights. Thank you very much, Emily, Andrew, Matthew, and Anson. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today. And as Christmas is just around the corner, may we also wish you a very Merry Christmas and a great New Year ahead. Thank you very much, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, everyone. Stay
Thanks,
safe and stay well.
everyone.